Build Your Business listeners. This is Matt Reynolds, your host for the podcast, and you are listening to what we are calling the legacy episodes. And really, these are the pre-episodes that really led to this podcast, the Build Your Business podcast. This is really my life's work and my brother's life's work in building your business. And so they were originally published in the Barbell Logic podcast as part of the Principles or Coaching Success series, but really touch on similar topics to the Build Your Business podcast: how to improve your productivity, how to set and accomplish your goals, deprioritize urgent tasks, to focus on what is most important to you, and most importantly, to become a better person and leader and business owner overall. I'm proud to bring you these podcasts. Again, many years of life's work, several years of podcasts, and several decades of business ownership. Hope you enjoy them and learn from them. You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast. You're listening to another episode of the Coaching Success series, and I'm here with a very special guest. I'm super excited to talk to him today. It's Dave Tate, man. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be on.
Dude, there's some stuff I want to share with you because I don't think you know. First off, I'm 45 today, so I'm old.
Happy birthday, man.
Thanks. Thank you. You have told lots of stories about your powerlifting career, and you have all these great table talks with these great lifters of both today and the past. And I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the business of EliteFTS and what it's meant to you in your life. But I do want to take a quick second because I don't think you know, and I apologize, I normally don't get emotional. I don't think you know what you and your business and your life have meant to me. I run a multi-million-dollar business. We have professionalized online coaching. I got into powerlifting because of you. I became a professional strongman out of that. I totaled elite in every weight class from 220 to 308 because I found your articles in the late 90s on testosterone.net, which is now T-Nation, and started reading Elite Fitness, now Elite FTS. Back in the old days, I was talking to some of my staff earlier this week, and I said, this guy has no idea that if Elite FTS didn't exist, Barbell Logic would not exist. And so you're one of those guys, man. I just want to start off and say, thank you. You don't know. And I think I put myself sort of in your position, at least on a dream level scenario of, I hope there are guys that come to me 10 years from now and say, man, the stuff that you were doing and the content that you put out and the stuff that you did years ago really impacted me. And I think there are more guys like me that you don't hear from and you don't know from, and you probably don't know a lot about their careers and what they've done. But what you have done in paving the way in the powerlifting world and the strength training world and have dramatically impacted my business. I've got 100 employees. We've got thousands of clients. We've been able to professionalize online coaching. And again, this is not about us. It's just, I want you to know that that would have never happened. I graduated high school in 1997, just right before you were kind of launching Elite Fitness, and found the Q&As and read articles. I remember reading the article, How to Bench Press 600 Pounds on T-Nation back in those years. And I thought there were like 3 guys in the world that could bench press 400 pounds at the time. And I remember reading that article and thinking, like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. I was a very average athlete in high school. I loved to compete, played all the sports, but I wasn't great at anything. Found the sport of powerlifting and read every article that you wrote. And then that led me to the old deepsquatter.com and read Louie's articles, and then started Powerlifting USA subscriptions and started finding meets in my area and started competing in the late 90s. And if I hadn't done that, I went on to open a gym in 2008 called Strong Gym. We won Powerlifting Gym of the Year a couple years in a row. Jeremy Frey became one of my training partners that trained there, and one of your sponsored athletes for years. And all of that, you look back and you're like, I didn't understand the impact that would play later in life. And so I followed you your entire career. And I'm just super excited to talk about the history and the process of building the business that you built. This is a very niche community, and there are a very few people in the world who have been able to build a successful business out of this strange niche community of lifting heavy barbells. We're two of them, and man, you are the one that set the pace. So I just want to say thank you first.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, it kind of was the aim from the very beginning. So, now being around for over 2 decades, it's to hear stories like this, it validates, the mission from the start, because as I'm sure we'll discuss, when you're online, you're kind of blinded to a lot of different things.
Yeah.
It's a different world than the real world.
Yep.
And sometimes the accolades, the impact that you're having isn't really as seen as it is in the real world. A good example of that would be Jim Wendler. He worked for me I'm old now, right? So maybe like a decade.
Yeah.
And,
Sure.
Jim has impacted, thousands, if not millions of people.
That's right.
And when you're online, most of what you see, or especially when you're younger and you don't know how to navigate it really well, is the criticism and the bad and all this other kind of stuff.
Yeah.
When he started coaching the high school kids that he's been coaching for almost 5-6 years now, it was a big flip for him, because now, every single training session, I'm like, thanks, coach. There's accolades all the time. The parents are giving accolades.
Yeah, it's tangible.
It's tangible. So it went from 90% negative, 10% positive to 90% positive, 10% negative.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And if people that get into this online space don't understand that soon, it's going to be a real rough ride for them. So and to me, like I said, I love hearing those things. I still kind of think you would have found your way as either way. We're all kind of destined to do what we do.
Oh, I appreciate that.
But to be any small part of that is an honor.
Well, I think you can look back at the milestones. I'm sure you have the same things where you see a thing that occurred many years ago, 20 years ago, and you didn't recognize the gravity of it at the time.
Yeah.
And now, 20 years in hindsight, you look back and you go, wow, that was actually a huge deal. And I didn't understand. And, I've built a friendship with Wendler over the years as well, and built lots of relationships, built off of your relationships, and guys that I've met, again, trained with Frey for years. When I opened the gym in 2008, it was tangible, right? Like, I was a teacher. That was my first career. I'd gone to get my master's to be a high school principal. I have a similar story of yours where my first semester, my freshman year, I had a 0.5 GPA.
Yeah.
I think you ended up with a better GPA. I barely got over the 3.0 mark, and then at some point grew up, got my master's to be a high school principal, and then knew by the time I had finished my master's that I wasn't going to stay in the public school system. And so I opened this gym in 2008, and just like you said, it was tangible. I mean, we had all these guys that were training together, and it was that atmosphere, and there was something special about that thing. It was extremely tangible. You get up every morning, drive to the gym at 4:30 or 5 in the morning, and you train clients, and you train with your training partners, and you do your thing. But I realized at some point that I was only so scalable. Like, you can only train so many clients one-on-one. And so when I made the switch in 16 and I sold the gym at the end of 15 and made the switch to online coaching in 16. And for us, we wanted to provide, again, in a similar way that I want to dive into today, that we wanted to be a value-based business that really focused on service. When the rest of the world looked at online coaching as selling programs, sell me a Google sheet, we made our clients from day one video their lifts, upload their lifts, their coaches broke them down within 24 hours, that kind of stuff. But there was still this like intangibility. All of a sudden I'm doing it from home, and my clients are all over the world, and my employees and my coaches are all over the world. And you don't walk in and unlock the door and turn off the security system and check people in and do the thing that you did at the gym. And so I remember the transition of that loss of tangibility, and even thinking for the first year or two, like, is this real? Like, I'm running an online business. I don't even know if this is real. Is it sustainable? Will it last? Now we look back and we're like, God, this is where fitness has gone. But, I think you saw the same thing. So, man, I would love at first to dive in. I have so many memories of things that I've learned from you that I want to pepper in. But I'd like to start even before you launched EliteFTS. You've told your story. You were a great powerlifter, and a better powerlifter than I was. I was a better strongman than I was a powerlifter. But even then, it was an outlet for me to compete. I was always a big competitor, but again, was kind of painfully average in high school sports. And when I finally found powerlifting and strongman, I found something that I could actually be decent at. And so I want to go back a little bit before you even got into the powerlifting career. From what I understand, like you grew up in a very blue collar family. Dad owned like an appliance business, right?
Yeah.
And you had this. I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of from what I've heard in the past and what I've read and remember in the past is you had dad really taught the model of hard work. And then it seemed like it sunk with you had a wrestling coach that sort of made it sink with you that like for some this model was given to you as a kid by your dad, but maybe you didn't really take hold and you were by your own words were a little bit lazy. And you eventually had a wrestling coach that said, listen, if you'll actually outwork everybody, you're not stupid. You're super smart and you can do anything that you want. Will you talk a little bit about that? Like, what did that background look like going into that before you were ever a business owner?
Going into it, both my grandparents also had small businesses as well. So one was an ice cream business and the other one was an appliance business, so that my father didn't adopt from them, but actually became a competitor of them. So growing up, now that you're older, as you said, you can kind of look back in hindsight. I can remember delivering appliances when I was 13 years old, and helping with that. But even before that, I remember cleaning the store, cleaning the appliances, cleaning the toilets, all those type of things. And the dinner conversations that would happen because, he'd get customer service calls and crap like that at home. And he was very adamant. I mean, I don't think we could do this today the way that he was, but he'd hang up on people and because it was dinner time. That was family time. And we
That's right.
take care of that after that. And the quality of the appliances that he sold were high end. And when companies like Best Buy and stuff like that would come into town, he's so frustrated with that because the educational aspect of, educating the customer on what the difference between this piece of junk is that's going to last 2 years to something else that's going to last 10 or 15 years. All those things as I look now, and, it's the only equipment we sell is going to be the highest end equipment. I'm not going to sell this cheap a lot of those values were kind of being instilled at a younger age, the customer service to the quality to work and stuff like that. So some of the things I remember from my father was, you play football in the front yard and, all the kids around the neighborhood would be playing. And we had these things in the yard that were like drainage things.
Yeah. Like the drainage ditches.
Yeah. So I remember one time, I strained my ankle bad and I went inside, and was crying or whatever it was. I was young. And all I remember him doing is telling me to get my ass back out there, and
Right.
finish.
Walk it off.
All those little breadcrumbs kind of lead into that. Now, being labeled as learning disabled back then, it was just LD, special ed. I had tutors every day in school, so I remember distinctly on my desk, I'd have like a diagram of where the hands are supposed to be. And I'm like the one of two people in the whole classroom. So I feel like a moron because of that. So a lot of the early education and the way that I was tracked was at that time you were tracked for vocational, college prep, or just graduate this kid. I was down that just graduate this kid thing. And when I was younger, my parents had tutors over the summer. I was going to school all the time. I mean, so they were doing everything that they could, to try to keep me at a level. Because back then they didn't just pass you through. You would fail. You'd have to
That's right.
repeat. That was the last thing that we wanted to do was to repeat.
You don't want to graduate at 22.
Yeah. And I remember a conversation with my mother and the principal, where the principal wanted to move me to a different school because I was pulling the averages down of the school and then basically saying I was retarded and other stuff like that. And, her standing her ground very firmly with that. And that's the tutor and all the other things came in there. And while I was younger, there's really no comprehension of that. But when I got into junior high school and started wrestling, I'm getting my ass kicked all the time. I mean, I was getting my ass kicked everywhere all the time anyhow. The first year of wrestling, I was loved to be called a fish, so I'm getting pinned all the time. Why I even wrestled is beyond me, to be completely honest with you. I don't know. Maybe some kids down the street were wrestling, or I thought maybe this was a way to defend myself so I don't get my ass kicked all the time. And after my junior high was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. So after the 7th grade season, I started working out with like a plastic weight set, which I don't talk a lot about this. It's my
Sure.
Uncle gave it to me for
Like the old Sears
Yeah.
plastic, like concrete
Like,
dipped.
yeah, I'm in like basement at first, and then my neighbor's garage. And it's like training 5 hours a day, doing every exercise, being a complete idiot. But that next year came around, and I was able to hold my own to a degree, but still didn't have the self belief that I could be better. And with the story that you're talking about is my mom was late picking me up one day, and I'm just running the stairs. Because at this point, you know, training, if it's Rocky or whatever it was that inspired me, I was kind of putting together in my head, if I train, then it's probably going to make me better, because these other guys aren't doing this. But if I do this, and she ended up being 30, 40 minutes late, but I'm running the stairs the whole time. The lights are shut down, everything shut down. The wrestling coach, that was Bill Mullen at the time, he walked by and asked me what I was doing. And I said, I'm sick and tired of being beat. It sucks being beat all the time. And he said, well, if you work harder than everybody else, you'll never get beat again. And so from that, I started running the stairs after every single practice. I started running the stairs during study halls. I'd get passes, but that's all I did was run the stairs. And they had this stupid universal machine. So I'd use that, but I didn't really connect the strength training that much. But I did know just from that universal machine, I was way stronger than everybody else. And then started to build the self-confidence there because, I don't know if you remember the show, it had like a leg press and a shoulder press.
Very well. Yeah.
I'm like stacking the leg press with cowboy boots, and everybody else is just straining. And I remember we had these little index cards, like 3 sets of 10. If you couldn't do 3 sets of 10, you stayed with the same weight, so you can do 3 sets of 10. Then after that, and it didn't take me long until I had like the stack on almost everything. And then I started to beat people. I started to beat them bad. That affirmation of, if you outwork everybody else, you'll never get beat. Until I spoke to him many, many, many years later, that's when I realized the context wasn't about wrestling, because he never said that, because he didn't know at that time that I would actually become a better wrestler, but that's the one coach. The other coach was after I flunked out of college and came back. That's where, during junior high and during high school, because I did start to become better in sports, the lack of my discipline or studying played in my favor for a kid in that position at the time. Because at that point, I didn't have to, because the coaches were taking care of it, right? So I can remember, before grades come out, there'd be a knock on the door, football coach, wrestling coach, talk to the teacher. I'm not getting B's and C's and stuff like that. I'm getting like a D, or a C plus, but I'm just getting through. And at the time, I don't see any value in education at all. Why would you? And all I cared about was training. And if I didn't have to do anything, so all the courses I was taking at the time were, I never took biology, I took rock science. I never took algebra, I took business math. And then somewhere along the lines, my parents asked about college, and they said, there's no way hell your kid's going to go to college. You've got no college courses and all this other stuff. So to fast track, my first year of school was going to Tiffin University, which was very small at the time.
What made you decide, like you've heard for 5 years, 6 years, you're never going to be smart enough to go to college? Was it, looking back now, years later, to go like, well, I built enough confidence in the wrestling and the strength to say like, people would tell me that I'm too stupid to go to college. I'm going to show them and I'm going to go to college. Like, what made you decide to finally go to college?
There were a couple things that played into that. The one was I was being recruited, and that abruptly, for football, because there became a point where weight classes became an issue in wrestling, where, in football, I'm a defensive end, offensive lineman, and I did not want to wrestle super heavyweight. That's a whole different,
Sure.
And I had to practice with them, and that was enough. And if I could go back, if there's any, I don't like the word regret, I would have leaned more into the wrestling and not played football, because that was my true love. I also pinned the guy that won state championship that year in high school. He was a super heavyweight. Not saying I would have been a super heavyweight, but my work ethic dialed more towards that. But in hindsight, the teamwork that I learned through football was valuable because I was a loner 100%, and that's why strength training and, all that kind of plays into that. But so my first year of college was just taking classes I was supposed to take in high school and didn't get college credit for, right?
Right.
So
The 050.
yeah, so the real reason I went into there is between my junior and my senior year, my father had me work. Being an entrepreneur, a small business owner, he had contacts. So he had me work in, there was a Sunny Delight orange juice plant, and I knew after doing that for a couple of years, there were a couple of different plants I'd work in, factories, I think I'd work at. That is not what I wanted to do. So if that was not what I wanted to do 100%, then I had to go a different route because that's the track, I was sent towards. That was part of the drive for the college. The other was just to get the out of the house, and
Right.
now I'd like to keep my kids at home as long as I can so they can save money and stuff like that because
Sure.
college is way more expensive than it was back then.
That's right.
Back then, I wanted to out of the house so I could, train, do all the things that I wanted to do. So it was a way out of the house and it was a way to do what I didn't want to do. After that first year of college, which is kind of fate, right? Because I'm not really being that stressed and educated. I'm taking things I should have taken in 10th grade.
Yep.
I went to Bowling Green State University and flunked out after the first semester because now those are like real classes. Right? That sent me back home for about 2 weeks because at that point I'm like, you know what? I'm going to end up working this orange juice plant. I'll figure it out. I'll make it work, but at least I can still train. It's all that mattered anyhow. That was where my old wrestling coach ran into me in the weight room and was asking me how everything was going. And I laid into him about essentially what was known as block periodization. Because when I was in college, I found the library, first time I ever went to the library, and my girlfriend would study, and I would just go up through the bookshelves, and I found the Soviet Sport Review, the NSCA Journal, all this stuff.
Right.
And
Zasyorsky,
oh my God.
Milsif. And by the way, I read all those things because you read all those things.
Yeah.
Again, that's another thing. I remember I've told the story of going in my university library. That was like in what I call the catacombs. It was in the basement. The shelves were all together. You had to pull them apart and you had to go through and you're like, oh man, here's Zasyorsky and here's all these great Russian guys who communism had fallen in 89, 90, 91. Those guys have all come to like Penn State and they've translated these books into English. And I remember feeling like I have discovered this thing that no one knows about.
Oh, that's how I was like it. Because everything to that point was, guys in the gym helping, which were a huge influence. But the Powerlifting USA I had, in muscle and fitness, like even with those, there might be one article on strength training. Powerlifting USA was kind of but this was a different level. And so I'm telling my old coach about this and how I'm applying it and how, it's making all this difference. And he stopped me and said, that is not what I asked you. He said, what I asked you. Because I think my parents or somebody told him beforehand that I just flunked out. He pressed me on that. And I said, well, college just isn't my thing. And basically, I'm justifying to him how everybody was right when I was younger. And this is something that's beyond my grasp. It's not really my wheelhouse. And then he reminded me of everything that I just learned, and told me his own story of kind of the same thing. And then asked me a question. And the question was, are you stupid or are you just lazy? And when I was driving home from the gym that day, I pulled over and probably cried for 45 minutes because I didn't know the answer. And that bothered the shit out of me. And that's why I went back. And then from that point, it was, I don't want to stay here at Bowling Green. This is where I flunked out. I want to go someplace else. And I want to study what I want to study, which is strength and conditioning. But I can't do that until I get a 2.5 grade point average. And I had a 0.75. And I was smart enough at that time, at least in my brain, to know don't take the class that you just failed. Because if you do that again, you're not going back anywhere. So I avoided those classes and I would walk through the bookshelves of the university or the bookstore and I would look for classes that I found interest in and I would only take those. 4.5 years later, I'm I have more credit hours than you need to graduate, but needed to get to and I went to every college on campus to get their little syllabus thing to figure out what you need to graduate. And I was one class away from a sociology degree. Just things like deviant criminal behavior just was
That's super interesting.
interesting to me. And I figured I could sit there and absorb this simple,
Sure.
One class I had to take was a foreign language. And I tried that several times. And the issue there was I had to learn how to spell it. I had to learn how to conjugate it. And I learned how to, it's like 3 classes in one. At that point, I took a couple more really easy, stupid classes, really stupid ones that pulled the grade point enough to transfer out. And then met with a guidance counselor at Toledo to say, here's what I want to do. I don't know what it really looks like at this time. It was somewhere between a personal trainer and a strength coach because neither one of them were really that popular. And the options were like sport management, managing a health club. And I didn't care. I just wanted to be able to learn everything that I needed to learn to make myself stronger. And then I'll figure the rest out. Because at that point, I figured all you need really is the piece of paper to be able to get a job. Because at that point, you see your friends graduate. Actually, I saw all my friends graduate. And they're not working in fields that they studied for. They're just taking whatever job they can get. And that's when my grade point pivoted substantially, because now I'm taking nutrition, I'm taking public speaking, I'm taking, leadership, I'm taking all these courses that we put together that would enable the best strength coach or best personal trainer out there, and then graduated with 3.8 or something like that. But it starts over too, right? Amazing. Well, you go from, it doesn't start at 2.5. It's a new school. It started at a 0. So that's kind of the long story short.
Yeah, I had a 0.5 my first semester freshman year after having the highest ACT score in my high school.
Wow.
Which means I was definitely lazy. Was definitely the problem.
That first semester, I didn't go to class, man.
No, me neither. I'm like, nobody's going to make me go to class. I can stay and play ping pong in the student hall. That's what I'm going to do. And so that's what I did. And I got put on academic probation. Mom and dad got the letter. Mom and dad said, no more tuition for you. You're now paying for your school. My dad was a minister, didn't make any money, so it was a struggle for them anyway. And they said, we're not spending money to do this. And so I had to take on that responsibility, and I had to work out of the 0.50 hole. And I ended up barely graduating with a 3.0 after finally pulling that up. And it took me 7 years to get my bachelor's degree. But then I got my master's in 18 months. Mm-hmm. So at some point there, I grew up, that I decided stop being a moron. And you're smart. And I was like you. I just didn't have to work in high school. I never had to learn work ethic there. So when I got to college, I was like, oh, you actually have to work, or you actually have to take responsibility to show up for 8 a.m. classes. I just didn't the first semester. And then eventually you figured out okay, this is not going to go well for me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do the same thing that you were looking at, where I'm going to work a blue collar job the rest of my life if I don't pull my head out of my ass. And so you get into, I know you had a stint then in kind of personal training and gym management, kind of started there, and that went well, right? You kind of turned around a gym before you launched EliteFTS. So was that your first foray into kind of fitness business?
While I was in college, training is still my top priority. So I definitely understood hard work. I just didn't understand hard work in other disciplines outside of the gym.
Right.
So during the time I was training, I was managing a gym. I was bouncing in 3 different clubs, so that's how I paid for college.
Tough life, by the way. People don't talk about that. You're up until 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Bouncing, sleeping for a couple hours, getting up and going to class, training.
Yes.
That's a hard few years.
Well, it was, it was pretty much all my time in college. But at the same time, I never took more than 2 classes. 3 might have been the most. I'd start the year with 4 or 5 or whatever the max was. Then I would drop.
I do the same.
But I would still pick those classes based upon, I'm probably not going to wake up until 10. I'm going to train at 10:30, so the classes had to fit in a certain time frame for that as well. And the gym management stuff would kind of fell into there, but most of the money I was making and job experience I had was probably from bouncing than it was the managing the gym. That's just the gym owner wanting somebody to sit in there and, call people on chargebacks and show people exercises and stuff like that. Once I graduated, and then it was trying to decide, again, powerlifting was leading the way. Am I going to move to Cleveland and train at Black's Health World, or am I going to move to Columbus to train with Louis Simmons? And I had inroads with both. And Matt Dimmel was more the catalyst than what Louis was, because Matt was kind of going back and forth from both of those. Some weekends I'd visit both to be able to train. And the decision for Columbus was a little easier because my girlfriend, wife at the time, was originally from Columbus. So that was the secondary motivation from that.
Again, though, think about that. You make this decision to move to Columbus where your girlfriend is, now your longtime wife, and where you've built your business and where you trained at Westside, and where like you look back and you're like, okay, I don't like, it doesn't even matter really what your worldview is and like higher power and stuff, but like there was something destined
Yeah.
to you ending up in Columbus. Like you
Yes.
had to end up there
Yes.
because everything has been built out of that area. And you made a decision because your girlfriend was there. Isn't that wild?
Yes. And she was, I mean, I was living with her. So we were together for a few years, before that. But the girlfriend I had before her was from Cleveland. So had I stayed with her, could have had a whole different trajectory, but it still would have been in a powerlifting gym. The thing with Columbus and with Louis that was intriguing is I didn't believe most of the shit he was saying, right? So either it was stuff I didn't know, or he was just completely full of shit. But he also was producing a stable of lifters, but at the time his stable of lifters wasn't the same as Black's. But at that point in time, my total wasn't going anywhere either.
Yep.
So my professors weren't helping me for shit. And so everywhere I was trying to go for help, everything was still more of a linear periodization model. And I had great lifters I was training with. I mean, Bob Wall was a 4-time world champion, and George Crawford.
Sure.
I mean, I had great people around me, but this was very different. So that played a big role into it. The other thing that played a role into it is right after I graduated, but before I moved. So before the decision was completely solidified, because I was making really good money at the time bouncing just from tips and shit like that. I don't even know if I make the same amount now. But there was that hole there as well. I can just stay here, build a better group of lifters, and just be a bouncer the rest of my life. And if I went to a bench meet in that gap and tore my pec, and I remember sitting down with Louis after that, and we were having a discussion about, me moving, me not moving, and so forth. And he just posed some questions to me about that when I was driving back, this what if thing I couldn't get out of my head. Like, if I'm done, right, because the pec has to be surgically attached, and I've already had 15 years in sport. Like, if I'm done, I'm going to be wondering, like, what if, I would have went to Westside and tried these different principles that nobody understands. And I could not live with that, or a hole in me like you couldn't believe. So that was the final catalyst. Like, that's going to be the deciding factor. So when I moved to Columbus after working temporary jobs for 6 or 7 months, and, realizing at that point in time, most of the money I made up to that point was cash. I'm like, who the is this tax person taking all
tax man, right?
And, I'm working 40 hours a week doing work and making less than half what I made in one night bouncing. I ended up with a personal trainer job in downtown Columbus, finally from there, which I needed a degree to do. I needed my ACSM and I needed my CSCS. All I had except for the stupid ACSM. So I had to take that one after being hired. And I spent pretty close to 7 years doing that. And then it was when we had my first child that I realized this is not sustainable. I can't train clients from 5 a.m. till 8:30, go to Westside from 8:30 until 11, go back to the gym from 11:30 to 10, every day of the week and have a kid.
And be a dad. You're going to have to make a choice.
And my dad worked all the time. He did the best that he could, but he worked all the time. And I knew that's not what I wanted to do. And that became my next big pivot point where a lot of my clients saw something in me I didn't see in myself. I made a trip up and had a conversation with Bill Parisi because I'm trying to figure out what exactly do I want to do here.
Had he already started his speed schools and stuff at
He
that point?
did, and that was something I was considering with my own personal training center because I had enough of a client base, but you never know how many are actually going to move. Location does matter, especially when you're working with lobbyists and attorneys and people who work
Sure.
downtown and they can just walk. Are they going to drive anywhere? The biggest takeaway I had from Bill is there has to be multiple streams, because he had the sport training center, but on the other side of that, he had a fitness center. So if one was doing bad, the other one could kind of offset that. And
Yep.
if it was a personal training center, that was posed to me like, well, what do you want to do? Like, what's going to offset that? Having been in the gym environment and just through college, and that's a hardcore gym, I didn't want to deal with that.
Sure.
What's the potential, there as well? And then I knew I didn't want to do this management of a corporate fitness center. I had the ability to be promoted to a manager, but I wouldn't do it because I made less money. I'm getting commission on this personal training. I'm not getting as a manager, except the salary, 60%.
The salary's safe, but there's no commission.
Yeah, and it was 60% of what I was making. I'm like, get screwed. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
So that's where, it took a little bit of time and a few different meetings to come up with an idea that, if I go online retail and then balance that with something on the strength and conditioning side, the online retail in itself would create enough different revenue streams that it could balance itself out. And I did start with, there was consulting, there were seminars and other stuff like that. So there was a service end at the beginning. So the service end and the retail end, I didn't know it was going to take as long as it did, to be able to do anything.
We never do. That's right.
So that's kind of what led into that.
You led into this great because I don't want to just skim over your powerlifting career, but the reality is that you've written extensively, you've talked extensively about your powerlifting career. We know the stories and the good stories, the bad stories, the crazy stories of Westside. I want to go to what you've just opened up, which is like, dude, it's like 97, 98. The internet is brand new.
Yeah.
It is a brand new thing. What makes you think that you can build a career on an internet that, again, just like we talked about, that even today in 2024 still on some level feels like, is this tangible? This is 1998, man. You can go to, there's 500,000 strength conditioning websites that are out there now. There was like 5. I mean, there were no websites. Maybe that's it. Maybe it was like, what was the thing that made you go, I think I can do this thing online? Like Louis has started to, he's inventing, like, I think the reverse hyper had just come out, right? Like, and so for you to go, I think I can do something with this.
I don't know if that ever was a thought that I had. It was still powerlifting's first. How can I pay for my powerlifting? Where before I was online, it was ads in Powerlifting USA. And the products that we had were sleds, the seminars. In the seminars, he got to a point he did not want to deal with the idiots anymore. So then I started doing the seminars for him. And some were in Westside, some would be in other places. And so it was to promote the seminars. And so I believe it was sleds. There might have been 3 supplements or something like that. And yeah, that was probably it. And then at a certain point in time, just with those ads, I went and did a seminar. About that same time, I got my first computer for Christmas from my brother who was at IT. So he built a computer. And I'm searching 2 things. I'm searching Iditarod dogs because I had a Malamute. And as I'm searching powerlifting, I found deepsquatter.com. And then I'm reading stuff about Westside that's on there. Some I agree with, some we really weren't even doing. So I emailed Jason Burnell, who owned the site.
That's right.
And because he was doing like a Q&A type of thing. And I said, I would like to do this Q&A. I train at Westside. I've been there for X number of years. So he would email me. I mean, we're going back to front page as far as the internet. So he'd email me these questions. And
I remember it well.
Yeah, I would email him back, and the grammar and spelling was atrocious. And then he would have to, format it and post it on front page, put it back up there. After maybe a year, I did a seminar in South Carolina. One of the attendants in the seminar, as we were driving to dinner that night, asked me if I ever thought about having a website. And I said, well, I have one. And he kind of laughed because all it was just, Elite Fitness Systems. And it was a banner page, like, we sell sleds, here's the seminars. And I think it was something that Jason Burnell created just, to help because of the Q&A
Sure.
type of thing. So it's just a static page. And he said, no, I'm talking something that's more organically. It will look, kind of like a forum. And I said, sure, man, because this Q&A, the problem with the Q&A at the time is it's taking a month before the new questions are actually being answered. It would be awesome if I could just answer them. And it's not a forum where you have to deal with all the bullshit that the forums are dealing with. It's, here's a question, here's the answer, stop.
Yep.
And so this site originally started as just the Q&A. It was Ask Dave. Right around that same time, I'm starting to look at the business as far as, how can I get out of the personal training that I'm doing now? Because this seminars are not making any income. I'm breaking even
Sure.
most of the time. And people are asking about things like the Russian manuals, bands, and stuff like that. So that became this tipping point where it did start to produce enough income that I was able, the EMIT had consulting university, for lack of a better word. So it was a 4-year program. It was $500 a month. And I'm like, hey, I'm making $500 a month. I'll just put that into this. It's not enough to live off of, but it's enough to reinvest back into it. So then I hired them. Then the first thing that they told me is I have to add more people to the Q&A. And of course, I'm like, you're out of your freaking mind.
Because you're the technician in everything, right? So
you're the one that they're answering the questions to. And like, well, if you don't free your time up from this, you're not going to be able to build, the
be
systems
a
that
manager and an owner.
Yes.
That's right.
So I'm going through that whole route from there. And then shortly after that, the programmer that was working with us on that Q&A wanted to create a shopping cart because there weren't a whole lot of them out there. And he figured if he can make this cart, then he can sell the cart, lease the cart to other people, but he needs somebody, as a prototype, to work from. And of course, I'm like, the Q&A is great. Yeah, let's do this. I only got 3 items, but let's just do that.
But we've got some traffic.
Yes, that was the start of it. It probably took another 5-6 years, until it was, this is something I should probably lean into a little bit. And I'm coming towards the ass end of my powerlifting career as well.
Yep.
So you're also kind of asking, like, what am I going to do? I don't want to do this personal training forever. So all this is kind of intertwined. So all this is going on while I'm still working as a personal trainer. So if somebody had a question or they called the number, I'd get a page because we had pagers at the time. You can't afford that giant cell phone.
Yep.
And then I'd have to call them back.
Sure.
And so it's all rolling together. And then sometime during that time period, Louis got frustrated as well with the mail order that he was doing. He had bell squat belts he was selling.
It's mostly through like Powerlifting USA and stuff, right? I mean, that's where he was advertising, if I remember right.
Yeah, and safety squat bars. And he just wanted out of all that shit. So he told my wife, who was training at Westside also at the time, he was bitching about it. And she said, well, we'll do that. So he gave us probably about $4,000 of product on consignment for us to take that over. All he wanted to keep was the reverse hyper and the videos. And so I still sold the reverse hyper. It was just, I'd get the order, I'd fax it to him, he'd send it out.
Right.
And there were other pieces of equipment as well, but all the customer service, all the crap that he had to deal with, we were now dealing with. And it wasn't this massive scale. It's like an order or 2 a day, if that. So that worked for all parties because he was still able to get his cut. And then we're able to get our cut. And then we can take whatever sales that we have and then put that profit into new product and kind of scale that way.
Keep growing.
Yeah, and the equipment world was different back then to where, 16 weeks was a reasonable amount of time to wait for a piece of equipment. But if you were to buy that piece of equipment and you're not a school or something like that, I get your money now, but then I have 16 weeks to be able to float that cash and put it into Dragon Door books or something like that. Hopefully sell the books before I have to pay for the equipment that ships out, and then slowly build that way. So again, going to the powerlifting roots, Louis had a big part of that because there's no way I was able to afford $4,000 of product on consignment.
Sure.
For a product.
Of course. One of the things I made the connection to is that, when you told the story of your dad sold very high-end appliances. His forte was not customer service. When you got into the online business, this was as somebody who was, Listen, dude, I was a super consumer. I was asking those questions on Elite Fitness, on Deep Squatter. That was me because I'm 19, 20 years old at the time. You built a business on service
Yeah.
and parlayed the service business into eventually an equipment business. And so what I noticed you did was that you focused so much on value and culture and service and answering those questions and creating tremendous content that you built a culture that pretty quick, and again, and this is, I'm thinking back, 20 years, that Elite Fitness was like unheard of. And a year later, a year or two later, like that's where everybody went for their content to learn about powerlifting. So you have built a business based around core values and a community and service and content. And oh, guess what happens? You build trust with your customers who then trust you enough to start buying the equipment, and the equipment business starts to slowly ramp up. And like you said, like that takes a long time to do. But what it didn't take a long time to do was provide excellent service. And so
Yes.
it's funny. It's almost like you took the inverse relationship of what your dad did, which was he sold very high end product, but wouldn't answer the phone at 6:30 at night because you're doing dinner. You're answering the phone at 6:30 at night, answering the questions within 24 hours. Pretty soon you've got these other big names, or Wendler's answering questions, and Coach X and Zach Evanesh and whoever. You got all these, the guys are answering questions, and all of a sudden you can get these great questions answered, and you feel like you're part of the community. And then when it comes time to buy a piece of equipment, guess who we're going to? Like, we're going to you because you've built the trust.
That kind of fell into place because when I first started with the EMIT, one of the first activities we were to do was to create a primary aim. And, that was something because they did stress, everything, all this doesn't matter. And it was supposed to be a month. That probably took 3 months for me to really figure out what that was. And that came from, and that's the live, learn, pass on. That came from the realization that I am training people for a living right now. I'm doing these seminars on powerlifting. None of this would have happened. The people that I trained with not helped me. The powerlifting club that I joined when I was 13 and a half years old, they're helping me. So Louis, I got those wrestling coaches. I got all these people that, took a kid that was just supposed to graduate with very little self-esteem when it comes to educational abilities, and was able to, turn and show, that there's more potential than what I thought. And so the whole premise from the very beginning is how many other people out there are like me, especially in the powerlifting world. And it's a lot because I've trained with them all, but the majority have the same self-limiting beliefs that I did, but yet they can break all-time world records. They can do these ridiculous things in the gym,
Right.
but they can't apply them anywhere else. So how can I take and provide education out to them to be able to show them that they can get stronger in the gym, but also be able to apply that to life? And how can I do that in such a way that's affordable, that comes at no expense to them outside of their time? And the only way that I can actually do that and keep it affordable is to have product to be able to sell that's going to support and pay for the bandwidth, the content, and all the other stuff. So when people will look at the company now and they'll compare us to, say, a Sornex or a Rogue or a different equipment company, and they're like, oh, now wait a minute. We're actually a media company that uses the capital to be able to keep producing media. Whereas, the difference there is I could use the capital to buy ads, and to do marketing and so forth.
To sell more equipment as opposed to you're a content company.
Yeah, where I knew from the very beginning, that this path wasn't going to have the higher end is the other path, right? Because of that, especially at that time, because nobody was really monetizing content anyway. But even with that, it took me a long, long time to even get to a point I was comfortable selling an ebook, because in a way that's kind of violating what this was started for in the first place.
Sure. I get it.
So there's a balance there that, I've had to change perspective on over a period of time, but there's definitely a balance there. In hindsight, I wish I would have known the difference in margins, you know,
Sure.
you go from,
Sure.
that to the other.
That's
But
right.
that's been from the marketing end, probably one of the hardest obstacles that I've had to overcome for this whole time period is where are we exactly positioned in the marketplace when it comes to competitors and so forth. And to some degree, you have an impact on that, but to another degree, the audience has the impact.
By the way, my audience is very familiar with the E-Myth. I've talked about it a lot, and it's because you exposed me to it. I remember you doing, I don't remember what year it was. You were answering questions. You were walking on a treadmill. I think you were starting to lose weight.
Yeah.
And you would answer questions on a treadmill. And I can remember you walking on a treadmill and talking about this book, The E-Myth, which was the best business book you had ever read that had changed your life. And you gave kind of a quick synopsis of the E-Myth. And I ordered it that day. And this was back when I owned Strong Gym, in the early days of Strong Gym. That would have maybe been 2008 or something. It completely changed the gym because I was the owner, the manager, and the technician at every level. Not only was I the head trainer, I was the custodian, I was the front desk staff, I was the guy answering the phone, I was doing, and you started to realize like you are never going to scale this business if you make it always about you, because you can't always be the technician and the manager and the owner. So you spend all your time working in the business instead of on the business. And so you started to see that. I started to see that transition with EliteFTS as well over time, where you started to make it a little bit less about Dave and more about the community and the service and the quality of the content that you put out. And oh, by the way, the quality of the equipment you sold continued to also, I remember buying, the top of the line at Strong Gym. We bought the best big collegiate power racks that you had because they were the best ones on the planet. Listen, really, when I say things like, I want you to understand, and I know there's other people like this, but you're walking on a treadmill answering a question about the E-Myth. And I don't know if you're thinking 100,000 people are going to see this or nobody's going to watch it or whatever. But there was a kid that was opening a powerlifting gym at the time who has now turned that into a $50 million online coaching business. And the E-Myth to this day, I'm in my library. I have 25 of them over here because I give them away so often to people. When like I have young business owners come in, I don't know what to do. I'm working all the time. I'm 70 hours a week. And I grab that book and I go read this. And by the way, that's a tester for me. If I reach back out to them 2 weeks later and they haven't read it yet, we're not working together.
Yeah.
That is a book you can read in a day or 2 days or definitely 3 days. If 2 weeks later they go, life is just too busy, I didn't get, like, listen, you actually don't give a shit. What you really want to do is work 70 hours a week and be a technician for the rest of your life. At some point, I want to be an owner of this business and have an incredible staff who are better at their jobs than I could ever be at their jobs. And I saw that again. Now, looking back, I saw you do that at EliteFTS where you said you answering all the questions was unsustainable eventually. And so you started to bring on the other personalities and make it more about this community. And I assume that allowed you to start to step away from the technician's role and move from manager to owner of this business.
Well, there's a few things I can comment on that is how much I was engaging after a period of time would be dictated upon traffic that I would see. So if it was the training logs or the Q&A or something like that, and if my training log is consistently ranked as first, I'm going to pull my log and push the other guys up. And there's a couple reasons.
That's risky.
For that is because, it's EliteFTS.com. It's not Tate.com.
That's right.
So if I didn't watch that fairly close, then while I am the face of the brand, I can't be the brand, right?
That's right.
Because, from a valuation standpoint, that's going to create an issue. There's different issues with that. So there's that one piece. But then if I stayed away for too long, then the core base is like, what the hell? Where you at?
Starts to fall off.
Then I have to pull it back. So it's a balancing act with that, which was a little easier to follow when it was training logs, Q&As and stuff like that, because we're pre-Facebook at this point. Social media, had an impact
changed
on
everything.
Areas of the site. Yeah. It just means that the content has to change. The other thing that's interesting is when I was doing those from the mill videos, I think I was working with Shelby Starnes at the time, and he's the master of ridiculous amounts of cardio. And so I'm out there walking on the treadmill, and I'm thinking to myself, this is a horrendous waste of time. Like, and as I'm doing this, there's Q&As I can't do because I'm on the treadmill. Yep. So my answer to that was, well, I'm just going to film the Q&A.
Turn the camera on and answer questions.
And then once that cardio was over, I became so accustomed to that because it was so much easier to do. And I could provide more context in the answer than if I sat down and typed it all out. That
Sure.
I always had a table in the middle of the weight room. And I never did this, but the original intent of that was if I put this big conference table in the middle of the weight room, then I would have our team members come out, have them wear what they wore to work. So if it's a pharmacist, they're wearing their scrubs. If it's a police officer, they're wearing their uniform. And all these people will be sitting around a table, and then we would take an overhead shot of that, and then that would show everything that we're about.
Yep.
Strength is the common bond between everybody from all these different professions. Never did the picture, but it had the table. And
that's right.
So I just
the table's badass.
Yeah, I just migrated from the treadmill when the cardio wasn't there to sitting in front of a camera at the table, which would be the very beginning of what the podcast is now, which is the
table talk. Yeah, which is great.
That's what I was calling it at that point in time. So it was just a way to economize my time better when it was ridiculous amounts of cardio.
Yeah, I love it. All right, one last topic and then we'll wrap up because I want to respect your time. Because anybody that goes through this business ownership for some level of time goes through a tremendous amount of adversity. We've both been sued. It's one of the worst things I've ever been through in my life. You went through the recession of 2008, 2009, really difficult. And you said, actually, I have a quote. I'm going to read it here because I think it's important and it matters. You said, behind every great leader, there's a person that's had to deal with a ton of shit. It's the adversity. It's that shit that is partially the reason they are in the place where they are. Better said, it is what they have learned from the adversity that has put them where they are. You said 2008, 2009 were living hell, but you were extremely grateful for it because it completely changed who you were. I'm going to try not to get emotional. 2019, I get sued by my mentor. It was one of the worst things that ever happened. I didn't know if the business was going to survive. I am so grateful now looking back at that. I was listening to a podcast not long ago that I respect about founders. And they had a guy on, very respected guy, who said he loves working with founders who have been through what he calls the fall, that they have been through some level of either massive business adversity, lawsuits, divorce, lost a kid, tragedy, and still came out of it and figured out how to grow the business after that. That's the person, and this is like a big investor, they're looking for founders like that to invest in because they know when the shit hits the fan, you're not going to quit. So will you talk for just a minute about some of those? You don't have to go into details about the adversity, but like what that has meant to you in your business life to be able to now be in 2024 and still successful, having gone through some of these periods of time that I'm sure were just horrendous.
I don't have a time cap, so I'll put that out there just before I answer this. But the way I kind of look at it is through adversity comes prosperity. And I'll use the legal side as kind of a jumping off point here, is the first lawsuit that I had to deal with was fraudulent in one way. I let my ego get attached to it. There are a lot of different things that you learn from it. So
sure.
While this was going on, I remember reaching out to Tim Patterson and discussing the issue with him a little bit just to get some of his thoughts, some of his insight. And I didn't understand what he said until it was over, because the first one's a bitch, especially if it drags out.
That's right. Yeah, and you're terrified. You don't know what to expect.
Yes.
There's a discovery, and then you're like, who's going to get deposed? Are they going to pull my employees in and depose them?
Yes, and they may.
You're terrified because you just don't know what to expect.
Yeah, and, all that could happen. And I remember him telling me, because the biggest fear that you have is that you're going to go out of business. The biggest thing that he told me was, Dave, you're not going to go out of business because this. You're going to go out of business because it's going to take all your time away, and you're not going to be able to focus on the things that you need to grow the business. So while it may cost the business, it doesn't have to cost the business all of your time. That should be spent actually doing the things to build the business. And, while this whole thing was going on from the start, because it lasted a couple of years, was, I'm spending hours upon hours upon hours, searching the internet, looking for things from potential countersuits, discovery,
yeah,
and all this other shit. And then when it was all said and done, it wasn't the worst that I thought it was going to be. It also wasn't the best that I thought it was going to be.
That's right.
And then on the back end of all of that, I'm like, this is no different than any other adversity I've ever had to face. It wasn't as bad as I thought.
Yep.
And it wasn't as good as I thought. It fell somewhere in the middle. but it could have taken less of my time. And it was the slap in the face that kind of reminded me, because all this still kind of relates back to the gym. You pull a muscle, you miss a lift, whatever it's going to be.
Yep.
There's only so many things you can control. You can only control the things that you can. You have no influence over the things that you can't control. And, to waste your time worrying about all the things you can't control becomes, anxiety, and if you're trying to repeat things that you did in the past and you can't figure why that's not working, and then you're depressed, so there's a certain degree of, you have the shit that you can do in the moment, that needs to be able to get done to build a future, but that future is not guaranteed, so I don't want to use this stoic live in the moment type of thing, but it's a big part of all that because it's really all that you have there. But the adversity never stops, right? It never stops. And you become more calloused or stronger, to it over a period of time where we may have 3 or 4 different stupid suits going on right now.
Yeah, think about what these trillion-dollar companies, and I realize most of the Jeff Bezos and the Zuckerbergs and the whatever of the world, they're all probably sociopaths. I don't, but
yeah.
They're getting called in front of Congress.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've never been called in front of Congress. As far as I know, you've never been called in front of Congress. Like, that's some real shit to deal with. So when the lawsuit comes in, yeah, I'm sure their first lawsuit was probably terrifying as well. But you're exactly right. The level of the adversity that it takes to actually truly stress you out, you continue to be able to handle more and more. So 2 things that I heard you say that we say a lot. One is, what a perfect description of business in general is that business itself is never as good as you think it is, and it's never as bad as you think it is, right? Like, it's very easy to get caught up in, this is incredible, we're going to be $1 billion business. You're probably not. And there's times that you think we're going to go out of business and this is going to destroy us, and you're probably not. It's probably somewhere in the middle. But 2, I don't know if you've ever heard me talk about this, but we talk a lot about voluntary hardship. I mean, I think one of the lessons that we learn as power lifters and as people who strength train is that no one's going to make you put a heavy bar on your back and squat. You are choosing voluntary hardship there. You're choosing voluntary adversity, right? It doesn't just have to be strength training. There's all sorts of stuff. I worked a 14-hour day, and I'm going to come home and do second shift with my wife and kids because that's what I'm called to do, and I'm going to do that, right? That's voluntary hardship. Voluntary hardship, I would argue, always refines us and makes us better.
Oh, yeah.
Adversity, involuntary hardship, which we are guaranteed to have life throw at us, does not always guarantee to refine. But what I have found is that the more people choose voluntary hardship in their life, when involuntary hardship is thrown in, when somebody gets cancer, when somebody gets sick, when there's a tragedy, when there's a lawsuit, you are better able to handle involuntary hardship or involuntary adversity when you frequently choose voluntary hardship or adversity in your life. That, to me, is how learning how to become an elite level powerlifter, a professional strongman, getting up super early every morning. And it's not because I'm Jocko and I'm taking, I set the alarm. I just wake up early and get to work, and I just do what I say I'm going to do every day and have for 20 years. And when you do those things, then when the real hardships come that you don't have control over, then you're able to step back and go, look, I've made it through adversity before, both the ones that I've chosen and the ones that I haven't. And we'll get through this. At no point at this point will anything happen to our business that makes me go, oh my God, maybe we should shut the doors. I think that is a lesson that a lot of us have learned under the bar. Like, that's the advantage of the adversity under the bar.
Oh,
is
yeah.
that when you have the adversity that's not under the bar, you can handle it better.
Well, it's also where you're going to put your focus, right? Because
That's right.
it take it back to the gym. Say you strain a hamstring, right? The hamstring's strained. Like, that is what it is, so I can
Yep.
put my focus on the fact that, the next 3 or 4 weeks of my training cycle are screwed up. Maybe I won't be able to do the meet. Maybe I won't do the meet. And all I can do is just focus on what that adversity is, right?
Yep.
Or I can realize hamstring strained. What do I need to do to be able to
Right.
get it back, to get it healed?
Time to get to work.
But at the
Let's
same
go.
time, I still got a bench. I still got all these other things.
Still got to run a business, still got to be a dad, still got to be a husband, still got to be all that stuff.
I'm not going to focus on the adversity any more than what I absolutely am required to focus on, because it's going to dilute
That's right.
all those other things. And that's a choice. A victim mentality is you can put the blame everything else. But, even in that mentality, you chose to do that.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
To where when it's, ultimate accountability, which is what it all is, I have this talk with my son all the time, right? He can go down a certain road and get a speeding ticket or blow up a tire out or whatever it is, and blame it on whatever he wants to blame it on. But you decided to go out and drive. You decided to go to whatever that party was. You decided to go down that road. All these things are decisions that you decided to do that led down that road. Fact is, this happened. Now what?
Yep.
That can't take away from all the other things where the focus should actually go. Because you can bitch and complain about whatever hardship or adversity that you have 24 hours a day if you want, or you can, handle whatever that is for whatever that duration is, for whatever control you have for what that is, and then lean into all the other things that you want to do.
Yeah. Not let that adversity rob you of all of the other things that are really important in your life that bring you joy long term, like the strained hamstring, which is really frustrating. Or, I've had a time in strongman where I had a really bad back injury. It bothered me for like a year. I mean, I couldn't do anything. I was doing all this, I was doing reverse hypers and I was doing all this stuff, and it just wasn't, it came on enigmatically, and after a year, it went away. But for that year, it was frustrating. And if I wasn't careful, I would let that thing, that adversity, affect all the other stuff, affect the work, affect the relationship, snap at my kids, be short with my wife. And you start to realize, like, no, that adversity's got to be put in a box. That is an urgency that has to be dealt with, and you got to deal with it. But if it takes away from the stuff that's truly important in your life, you've let the adversity take control of your life. And that's the problem.
Yes, and I think everybody needs to go through those things. So what you were talking about, the involuntary, kind of helps with that. Everybody needs to go through those things. And, if they're wise and if they learn from their mistakes and adversity and so forth, age will take care of that. Where it's easy for me to sit here at 56 years old and say all these things. But, if I was to tell the 26-year-old me, about this, I would probably tell myself to shut the hell up. This hamstring's a big freaking deal. But,
Sure.
Even at that point in time, there's still all the other things that have to be done, to be able to get those done. And it parallels, a lot of the things I hear today with, younger kids on social media and all this other kind of crap. And I don't disagree, with a lot of the things that are being said, but where I have a big disagreement with that is what an opportunity that is for the kids that realize what they have in front of them.
That's right.
To where if I could go back to when I was at the height of my powerlifting career and Instacart my groceries and order anything from Amazon and get it within a couple of days and free up all that time to be able to use that time to better educate myself on better training principles, to be able to, implement different restoration methods. And if I filled that gap with things that actually make me better, how much better would I have been? And that's the opportunity that they're in now. Now, the difference is if you don't fill that gap, somebody is going to fill it for you,
Yep.
either through endless scrolling, Netflix, or stuff like that.
Yep.
It will be filled. So in today's world, there's no reason for anybody to say, I don't have the time.
That's right.
That's
right.
complete bullshit. You have the time. You're just allocating it to things that are not going to help you get to where you want to go, unless that's where you want to go. Like if that's where
That's
you
right.
want to go, is just to be that, fine, lean into it all you want. But there's so much opportunity. And it's where I circle back to is there's a reason why, the top 10% of the top 10%, it's still 10%. So why would we expect the kids coming up today are all going to be in the top 10%? They're not. So you got to focus on the ones that are willing, to be able to do those things, to be in the top 10%. And they're the same mentality that you were and many other people were at that time as well. They're still there. It's just, highlighting the other 90% is what's different today than what it was before, because before we just didn't see them.
Yeah. And I think as parents, I want to pour as much wisdom into my kids as I can to help them learn that lesson. I hope they have more wisdom at 45 than I have at 45.
Mm-hmm.
I hope they have the same wisdom I have at 45 when they're at 30. Maybe they won't, but that's my goal as a parent. And so shameless self-plug here because you just literally led this in. I'm writing a book right now that Forbes is publishing called Undoing Urgency. And it's really about this very thing. It's that we live a life so involved in urgency. When we were kids, if somebody said like, how's it going? How you doing? The answer was good. That was just like what you said to everybody. Now, when you say, how's it going? The default answer is busy. I'm so busy, right? Well, you're not. You've filled your life with urgent things that don't even matter. And you've crowded out the important. And so the book that I'm writing is about how do we remove urgency from our life to focus on the stuff that's actually important to us. And it comes back to being a values-based business, a values-based life, having that value-driven life. And it's different for everybody, whatever those values are. For me, it's my family, it's my health, it's longevity, it's my community, it's faith, it's whatever, it's those things. It's the business, the CEO version of the business. Like when I get stuck doing the urgent stuff in the business that I could delegate out, but just because I can do it, I do it. That's a problem. And so it's very easy, even for the guys that tend to be very ambitious and overworkers, to still fill their calendar with the urgent and crowd out the important. And the most frustrating days that I have on a daily basis, luckily few and far between now, are the days where I feel like I work my ass off all day long and accomplish nothing that mattered.
Yeah.
And so my goal is to accomplish things that matter today and pull the weeds on the stuff that doesn't. And those things are almost always urgent, but rarely important. Now, I have a big advantage now. I've got teenage kids, same thing for you. I've got kids now that can go get the groceries, or we deliver the groceries. I've got kids that'll go fill my truck up with gas. I don't ever need to fill my truck up with gas anymore. That's stuff that I can pay, and my kids need money and want money, and so I can pay them to do those things. So I can remove, I'm never going to mow my lawn again. I need to run a business, right? I need to be a dad and a husband, those sort of things. And so whatever that is for you, I would say, like, focus on the important stuff and figure out where the urgent weeds are in your life that you have to pull so that you're not constantly drowning in that urgency. And I think that's the life that we tend to live now.
The couple issues that people run into that is they don't know what their core values are, which is one of the first problems.
That's right.
The second problem is when you're talking about things that are important, going back into the gym, one training session doesn't mean you're going to have a great event or you're going to have a great meet. It's a series of those in a row. So the important things don't come in little check boxes.
That's right.
There's a certain degree of satisfaction into, having a to-do list, and, every email is checking off one to-do list, right? So,
but how important are those things?
Well, they're not, right? Because the important things don't come in a checkbox. That has to be scheduled and to be put out there. And a lot of times those important things are going to stretch your skill set, where you're going to have to learn a new skill set, or find somebody that knows the skill set, or find a way to be able to vet people who know the skill set.
That's right.
That takes time.
It takes time. Important stuff takes time. Nothing that is important comes easy, right? Easy is never important. And so, like, you don't get to be a good dad in one day. It takes decades.
Yeah.
You don't get to be a good husband in one day or 1 week or 1 month. It takes decades. You don't get to be a good business owner in 1 week or 1 day, or, whatever. And so that when we recognize that the important stuff takes time, then we've got to allocate the time by pulling the crap that doesn't matter.
Time and mistakes, because you're not going to be a good parent if you don't screw things up. You're not going to be a good husband if you don't screw things up. So all those things, it's leaning into that adversity instead of shying away with it. I mean, that has to be a certain degree of critical thinking. Like, here's this adverse thing. Is there something that I can learn from leaning into this? Because on the other side of that, even if it is failure or bad months or a bad quarter or a bad year, on the other side of that is that better year, that's down the pipe. So there's a certain degree of faith that you have to have.
That's right.
That, all things are still going to be good, but the avoiding the adversity and not doing the important things. I mean, all these things add up, and they're all timeless. I mean, you can go, to all the philosophers, and they're saying the same thing.
That's right.
That everybody's saying now. It's just so easy to want to have the checkbox. But on the other side of that is when I'm mentoring somebody and it's in business or whatever it's going to be, one of the first things I'll have them do is to define what their values are. And there's a couple things with this. The way that I would go about doing this is I ask them to write down 10 people, book characters, movie characters, it doesn't really matter, that said something that resonated with them, that had an impact on their life. The wrestling coaches for me, Louis Simmons, these people.
Yep.
Write down those 10 people and then write down what they said or did. And then on the flip side of that piece of paper, write down 10 people that have pissed you off like you can't believe, and what they said or what they did. And then go on Google and just search list of core values and assign a core value to each one of those things.
Each one of those.
It's going to become very apparent. If our core values are ingrained in us before we're teenagers, maybe even younger than that, they're core values. You're not changing. right? So once you define what those are, then you kind of have a playbook, so now there's that fire, there's that adversity, there's that drama. I don't know what to do. You look at your core values and yeah, you do. You know exactly what to do.
Yep. Yeah. And you have to make decisions, maybe not every day, but close to every day in the business and in our family. And you make a hard decision. And there are times we've made decisions that for sure were not better for the bottom line of the business because they weren't in line with the core values of the business. If the core values of your business are the poster that hangs on the wall and nobody gives a shit about them, those aren't core values. If they drive everything you do, then they are.
Yeah.
I'm proud that we've been able to be that. I've seen that at EliteFTS for decades now. And dude, thanks for leading the way. It's been an honor to have you on the show. It's been an honor to be able to chat. I hope to get out to Columbus and see you soon and shake your hand face to face. It's been 20 years.
Yeah.
We were both a lot younger. And so I remember you were nice at Westside. I remember Chuck V just grunted at us and as he does. But that's what I wanted, right? Like that when I walked away, I was like, yeah, Vogelpohl basically just grunted.
Mhm.
That's what I wanted out of that guy. Halbert was great. And Ruggiero was great, and got to go eat at Bob Evans with Louis. And those times were awesome. But, I think this really comes out of being able to define. I think you nailed it, defining your core values and in your life. And those core values in our life and in my family, they are the core values in the business.
Yes.
They're not radically different. They're very similar. The way they play out tactically in the trenches change a little bit, obviously, because the scenarios change. But your core values are your core values. And I think, again, what a great lesson to learn for parents to instill those in your kids as young as possible so that while you have total control over their life when they're 2 and 3 and 5 and 7, and you instill those core values and you realize one day your kid's 18 and you don't have that same control, if you haven't invested in the time to help them adopt those core values, their core values that actually matter, you've missed the boat. Now it's too late. Right? Like now, again, you still can do everything you can to repair that relationship as much as possible. But that's a huge lesson for us. It's been to try to communicate that and not just communicate, but to live it out.
Well, and yeah, at the same time, put them in environments, to where those are going to be instilled. Because if you go to the list that I'm talking about, your parents may be on there, but there's a lot of other things that are going to be on there. Right. So all those other things that are on there, where my parents strategically putting me in different positions to where other people can have that influence. So you have to, it takes a village to raise a child. So
That's exactly right.
Village, what are they exposed to? Where are those values going to be instilled and where are they going to come from? Because as a parent, your kids probably aren't going to listen to you until they're 20.
Well, and they're not going to adopt all your core values.
No.
And some of my core values are specifically things that I'm going to do different or have done different than my parents did.
Exactly.
My parents taught me core values and things that they did in a way that I disagree with.
Yes.
And my kids will do the same. And that's okay because my goal is to help my kids move the ball down the field.
Yeah.
My parents did a really nice job of moving the ball down the field from grandma and grandpa. And we've done a good job of moving the ball. I want my kids to move the ball down the field, which means I have to recognize I'm not perfect. Their core values can be different, but I don't want them getting sacked in the backfield, 20 yards in the backfield. I want them to take the ball and have some ownership and some independence and take it down the field. So,
yeah,
man, great life lessons. Dave, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been such a pleasure and an honor to interview you today. For those of you guys who are listening to the podcast, thank you for listening. Thank you for giving us your time. If you got value out of this, as always, we'd love a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You've got a big season of Table Talk that's been coming out lately, and then you got another one you're going to record, I think, in the spring. And so Table Talk, what else? Anything else you want to promote before we end the show?
EliteFTS.com. Very simple. Everything's there.
I love it because there's still all those archives. There's still, you've got tens of thousands of pieces of content at this point that are so valuable.
Yeah. At a time, before we pulled the Q&A down, there was over 1 million pages of content.
That's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And so I love it, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you meant to my life. And for real, I know there are others out there that feel the same way that I do, that you've probably never even heard of and don't know, but you've made a huge impact on my life. I'm really grateful for it. So thanks, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it.